Hello, Kinky Weasel here. For this video, I'm going to be looking at rust chipping techniques. I'm no expert, so I'm just going to have a try, play with some techniques and see how easy they are to get a decent effect. You may recognise this from my previous video when I tested out these Army Painter Fanatics effects paints, but for this piece I'm going to be trying out salt chipping and hairspray chipping. And for these next two pieces, I'm going to be trying masking and sponging as techniques. So first of all, I've masked off half of this piece, the bit that I don't want to be spraying hairspray on. I'll be spraying a couple of coats on here, which will be the base for the hairspray chipping technique. Okay, so I've sprayed a couple of coats of hairspray on the right hand side of this. As you can see, it's now dry. Well, you can't see that it's dry. You'll have to take my word for it. It is dry. On the other side, I'm going to use the salt chipping technique, which, as the name would suggest, you just use salt for. Well, salt and water, but salt, basically. All you really need to do is just get some water, get the area wet that you want to be rusty, and then you apply salt onto the wet areas so the salt will stick to where it's wet. Now initially I started using tweezers to apply pieces of rock salt individually. I very quickly found out that this is nauseatingly slow, and so adjusted my technique. It wasn't long before I realised that just crumbling and sprinkling rock salt onto the wet areas was a much more efficient way of doing it, so this is what I ended up with. Well, the salt is now dry, so I'm going to go away and cover both these sides, both these halves, with some spray paint. So here it is done. For the salted side, it's just a matter now of rubbing the salt off and leaving the rusty undercoat exposed. As easy as that. It's not bad, is it? There has been a bit of bleed under some of the chips where they weren't flush with the surface, and I think less regularly shaped pieces of salt might have had a slightly nicer effect. But overall, yeah, it's alright, isn't it? For an easy technique, the effects are okay. Right, so this next one is the one I'm interested in, the hairspray technique. Apparently what we need to do is scrub away at the surface of the paint with a wet brush. Apparently the water starts to break down the hairspray, which is water soluble, and it causes the paint to chip off. It took quite a bit of work to get this to start going, but when it did, the effects were actually quite good. You can just see it starting to go here. So let's just pause, dry it off a bit and have a look, see how this is turning out. Yeah, so far so good. Bit more work, but so far I'm happy. Let's crack on with this. I did find that the more water I used, the better it seemed to work. And also, when it started working properly, it kind of went a bit frothy, which I guess is the water breaking down the hairspray. So here you go, here's the end result. I think that's pretty good. That's quite special, isn't it? However, I did notice that on these bits here, I'd obviously scrubbed a bit hard. I started to go through the rust paint into the primer. So maybe priming with brown might have been a good idea. For this third technique, I've had an idea. I'm going to use this stuff, Copydex, which is a rubber solution glue. I guess it's a UK brand, I don't know, but I would imagine most markets have got a similar thing. But the idea of using it as like a mask, a masking fluid, primarily because it's cheap. So I'm just going to apply it onto the areas where I want the rust to flake through, where the chips to show. Applying it with a brush. I would advise using a completely ruined brush because, as I found out later, this stuff is not water soluble, so I couldn't clean it out. So I've got a completely trashed brush now. So here's the copy decks dry. Next stage is blast it over with some spray paint. And having done so, let's get in and start picking off the copy decks and see what it looks like. Started out with tweezers, but eventually worked out that the tip of a modelling knife was a much easier way to get under there and pick it off. I did move on to using a fine emery board, which did have the effect of taking out the bits that I couldn't get to with the knife. And also by rubbing gently, it just sort of chipped into the surface to make it look a little bit more corroded. I think the effect was quite effective. The last technique is just using paint. Yeah, I know, weird, right? Using paint to paint things with. I'm stippling with a sponge to get some random chipping effects on there. I've also stippled with a knackered old paintbrush, and then afterwards I've gone in with a little bit more detailed work, just tidying up the edges of some of these splodges with a paintbrush. The colour I used here was the dark rust from Army Painter Fanatics. I've then gone in with the fresh rust paint and just sort of dabbed and stippled that into some of the larger patches, trying to get a bit more of a fresh rust mottling kind of look, just for a little bit of variety really, bit of visual interest, bit of realism perhaps. So final results. Top left we can see the masking technique. The patches are quite hard edged. They don't look especially organic. I mean, they're okay, don't get me wrong, but I'm not entirely sure that the hassle of picking all of that copy decks off was worth the end result. Maybe with a bit more weathering applied, maybe with some washes and things, you might get a half decent result, but compared to the other techniques, I'm not convinced. With the brush and sponge method, yeah, I quite like it. It's nice, isn't it? It looks okay. It's not going to win any prizes, but it does the job, and it's probably the simplest method of all of them. Certainly the least potentially messy. Moving on bottom left to the salt chipping technique. The end result looks similar, I think, to the masking technique. And for both, I think I'd use more. I'd use more salt. I'd use more of the copy decks. I'd also probably try and crumble the salt crystals down more, make them finer to get a finer result. But yeah, it was easy. It's got a decent result. Just need to be careful of the spray paint bleeding under where some of the crystals aren't flush with the surface. But yeah, overall, like it. Now the hairspray method. This for me was a revelation. I love the effect. I think it looks really, really good. Learning from experience, I would say more water is better. I would also say be careful you don't scrub too hard once it starts to go, because you don't want to be scrubbing through the base primer that you've put your rust effects over the top of. But yeah, I will be using this again. You'll see this technique being used again on this channel because I'm very, very impressed. So there you have it. A bit of fun, a bit of experimentation. I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope you found it useful. Let me know what you think in the comments below. I'll be interested to know what experience you've got of these techniques and which, if any, you think you'll be using. But for now, that's it. It's me signing off. Thanks for watching and take care. Bye for now.